Welcome to the Black Madonna Speaks, a YouTube channel. I'm your host, Stephanie Georgieff. I'm author of now 2 books. You can learn more about that at the end of this video, or you can click the links below to learn about those books. But this is a special topic this month, going away from the Black Madonna topics, and I'm going to look at a wonderful and very interesting, and I think prerequisite to the entire genre of the Black Madonna in terms of an artistic motif, and it's the Queen of Sheba. Now, in Sheba, which is an ancient kingdom in Africa, and this is currently in Ethiopia and Yemen, and her name there is Makeda, Queen Makeda, but I'll refer to her as Sheba for just because that's what I'm a little bit more familiar with, but definitely know that she has another name. And there's so many ways to interpret this historical and very deep legendary figure. But what I want to look at is the concept that wisdom meets love. And as I say in all of my videos, these are my opinions, this is my research, and I invite everyone to do their own research. I'm not the expert, these are just insights that I have, that I eventually put into books, but I think it's very interesting. Now, this is an image from a medieval illuminated manuscript, and it's the Queen of Sheba. And as the Ethiopians would know her as the Queen of Makeda. Now, the reason I am taking a little bit of a different look according to Sheba is I always look at art and legends and myth and even historical people throughout our known history as symbols of their times, but also people that we can learn from. And I think the Queen of Sheba has much to teach all of us. And you've heard me speak many times about how in the beginning, the spiritual world created the heavens and the earth, and humanity was created basically as the crown of creation. But humanity was created for a specific purpose. And we're supposed to be the 10th hierarchy in the angelic community. And what makes us very special is that we have freedom. And we were created to help facilitate the creation of a cosmos of love out of a cosmos of freedom. So we were given actually cosmos of wisdom, excuse me. So we were created to help co-create and facilitate the creation of a cosmos of love out of a cosmos of wisdom. And in order to love anything, you have to have freedom. You have to choose to love. It's always a choice to love, always a choice. It's always a choice not to love, actually. And in order to do that, we were created to have freedom. And we chose to veer off the path, so to speak. And the spiritual world put in this grand plan B to educate us on our purpose and give us a skill set so that we could take up our place as the 10th hierarchy in the angelic community, and we could help co-create this entire amazing cosmos of love. And so as we separate more and more from the spiritual world, there are places and oracles and prophets that help us along the way. And there are mystery traditions. And there's basically 4 of these mystery traditions. There's the old mystery tradition, when human beings and gods lived together. And then there's the semi-old mystery traditions during which human beings could continue to experience the activities of the gods in and around themselves. And then there's something called the semi-new mysteries, or the half-new mysteries, when human beings began to assume more of an independent place apart from the gods. And again, we have to be independent. We have to learn how to use our freedom wisely in order to co-create this cosmos of love. And then, after these half new mysteries, there will be the new mysteries, the new mysteries. So, what's interesting is that the whole Solomon and Sheba Makeda mystery traditions are part of this transition from the semi old to the semi new. Now, Queen of Sheba Makeda traditions come out of numerous sources. And this is why I find this image, this being, the Queen of Sheba, the Queen Makeda of Sheba, so fascinating. And we hear about her in the Old Testament. So she's part of the Jewish tradition as well as the Christian tradition. Now, she's mentioned in the Old Testament in the first book of Kings, chapter 11. And we hear that the queen came to visit from Sheba. They don't name her, but she came to visit Solomon. She was seeking wisdom. They had a lot of discussions. She gave him some gifts and she went home. And what's so fascinating about that is in the Old Testament tradition, there's only a few verses, and yet this image really is prevalent, particularly in European, medieval, and Renaissance art. She's pretty much everywhere, which I think is fascinating. Now, we also hear about this being in the New Testament. And this is what I find is fascinating, and I'll refer back to this later in our program. But we hear about her in both Matthew 12, verse 42, and Luke 11, verse 31. And I'm just going to read you the Luke 11 verse. And the Luke 11:31 says, "The queen of the south shall rise up in judgment with the men of this generation and shall condemn them, for she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here now." So there's this very interesting, and pretty much the verse in Matthew is basically verbatim the same, which I find very interesting that two of those scriptures are pretty much the same. And we also hear about her in the Quran, and it's a much more lengthy story and a little bit more about the relationship. It's a little bit more of an adversarial relationship in the Quran, where Solomon is basically saying, better submit to me or I'm going to come and destroy your nation. And she comes with gifts, and they exchange wisdom together. Now, the third source is an Ethiopian source called the Kebra Nagast, and this also means the glory of the kings. And this is a very elaborate story about the relationship between Solomon and Sheba, or Queen Makeda. And this is a source that was written sometime between the 3rd century after the incarnation up to the 12th century. And what this document does is it's a very elaborate, lengthy story, and it also talks a lot about the child that was conceived through the union of Solomon and Sheba. And there were dynastic disagreements in Ethiopia, and this book was written as a testament to the legitimacy of what they call the Solomonic line of kings in Ethiopia, that basically say, yeah, we can put our lineage all the way to the king of Israel's Solomon. And there's really interesting research and even traditions to this day that show a very ancient form of Judaism that is present in Ethiopia. And also that the Ethiopians claim that they have the Ark of the Covenant, and some of the most ancient Christian communities on earth are found in Ethiopia. So these are the three sources, and there's also lots and lots of legends surrounding Solomon and Sheba. Now, what I find so fascinating about this story, and we see this a lot in, I would say, the Kebra Nagast, is that this meeting of minds, a meeting of hearts, and a meeting of destinies, is that Sheba represents humanity who is learning how to be more independent and think for themselves. And the fame of Solomon obviously went all around the known world. And one of the things that is so incredible about Solomon is that Solomon had the opportunity to have anything that he wanted. Anything he wanted, it would be granted to him. And what Solomon asked for was wisdom, which is really profound. And Makeda, Sheba, the Queen of Sheba, was very moved by the stories of Solomon, and she was seeking a mentor. And she came and she noticed this. She had profound conversations. We really don't know the depth of their conversations, but we do know, according to both the Quran and the Kebra Nagast, is that she took on the worship of Jehovah, Yahweh, of the Israelites. So she took that on. And she also is, to me, the symbol of humanity being transformed into individuals, taking on this task of being an individual thinker. Now, the Queen of Sheba is really prevalent throughout the Middle Ages, and these are two portals along the Shaltra Cathedral. And the one on your left is my personal favorite. And we see Sheba in the center between Melchizedek and Solomon. And we also see very interesting, throughout Shaltra Cathedral, we see very interesting references to the Ark of the Covenant. And Sheba is basically standing on top of an African slave of the time. And it just shows to me this stemming of the font of wisdom from an ancient civilization and going to these different types of ways towards wisdom. Now, what we need to remember is that during the Middle Ages, people thought differently, and they were actually much more spiritual. It was more of a passive spirituality. Now, in our modern era, we have to actively go after our spirituality. But in these ancient times, this is 1,000 years ago, the spirituality was just really available to people. And so you could say things or have a picture and it would mean a lot to people, versus now we say the Queen of Sheba and it's like, oh, okay. But just realize that this symbolism was very profound for people in the Middle Ages. And personally, I think it has a lot to do with this transformation of the mysteries. Now, Queen Makeda has an amazing story. As I said, she is credited with killing a dragon. She was orphaned as a young woman and took up her throne. They could have given it to some man, but she decided that she was up to the task. And she sent out ambassadors all over the known world seeking wisdom. She wanted to see what other kingdoms were doing and how they were conducting themselves and how they ruled, because she really wanted to be a good ruler. And she sent out an ambassador who went to the kingdom of Israel and was warmly welcomed by Solomon and his court. And they established trade agreements. Israel at that time was probably one of the most dazzling, wealthy, and cultured uh, kingdoms in the known world and in that region. And she was schooled on what this ambassador saw, and there was something in her that felt that a king who asked for wisdom above all things, he obviously had something to share for her. So she went loaded with gifts, spices, gold, animals, livestock, and also slaves. She brought a lot of people so that they could be servants of this amazing, dazzling court. And she met with Solomon, and she, according to some traditions, asked him lots of riddles. They had daily discussions, and there was definitely a meeting of minds here. And she was so impressed with him that she decided to abandon her traditional worship traditions. She was a worshiper of the sun and the moon, and she took on the god of the Israelites. According to some traditions, they got married. Others, they spent a passion-filled night, which left her with a son when she returned to Ethiopia. She gave birth, and apparently this was not an issue, not having the father present. And this was seen as proof that she was the legitimate king, ruler of her kingdom, her queendom, and her son grew to be a very wise ruler. He, at age 18, went to see his father and was received quite warmly. According to legend, Solomon actually wanted him to be his heir, but the son, whose name is Menelik, decided to go back to Sheba and his place that he had known his whole life. And he took back an entourage of sons of the ministers of Solomon. And the sons of the ministers of Solomon weren't thrilled about having to leave this dazzling court. So they decided, for whatever reason, to steal the Ark of the Covenant. And Menelik discovered this only a few miles away from his home and wanted to return it. But his entourage told him they'd get in a lot of trouble if they decided to do that. There's no evidence that Solomon sought the Ark of the Covenant. We really don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is, but according to the Ethiopians, it's in Oscom and it's in a church, St. Mary of Zion, and apparently nobody can see it, but every January 18th, there's a huge celebration, and the Ethiopians are convinced that they have it. Now, throughout the evolution of art and the Europeanization, I'm not saying that properly, of biblical art, what we start seeing is the depiction of this scene of Solomon meeting Sheba over and over and over, but Sheba gets paler and paler the closer to the Renaissance that she gets. But this is interesting. Most very famous artists, from Holbein to Raphael, they have some sort of depiction of Solomon meeting Sheba. And in my opinion, this is an artistic rendering of this transition from the semi-old mysteries to the semi-new mysteries, where we become more independent. Now, this is a modern icon, and in my opinion, it feels more realistic to me. It shows the beautiful dark skin of Queen Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, and on her crown is the 7 pillars of wisdom that we learn about in the book of Proverbs. Now, I couldn't find this, but I would love to find it. I read about a medieval Catalan map which shows the Queen of Sheba with the sun surrounding her, beaming to all the continents. And so, in my opinion, this shows this deep consciousness that this original wisdom, this cradle of humanity, which Africa is, the ancients, particularly the Romans and the Greeks, they looked to Africa for wisdom. They considered anything that came from Africa to be of the ancient traditions and to be respected. But it shows that this wisdom was beaming to all the continents. And it shows that the ancient wisdom traditions and the cradle of humanity began in Africa. Now, this next slide, if you've ever been to Florence and the Duomo in Florence, next to the Duomo is a baptistry, and that's where people would go and get baptized. And this is a beautiful brass door, and this is the meeting between Solomon and Sheba. Now, the reason I chose this picture was there's been some very interesting research done, this development of the DNA and the human genome. So we can do really interesting research in DNA and find out, heritage from thousands of years ago on current people. And so in this one research study, they went to 10 different regions throughout Ethiopia and took samples from 10 different people, and they ran the sequencing. And what they found is that Syrian and Israeli and Ethiopian DNA definitely starts to mix. There's definitely presence of Israeli and Syrian DNA with Ethiopian DNA starting approximately 1,000 years before Christ. And it's about 900 BC is the time of the dazzling rule of Solomon. And so to me, this is really fascinating. It's this showing in science of DNA of the meeting of these two cultures, but also proving this evolution of the semi-old mysteries into the semi-new mysteries, and this period in history where humanity started becoming more individualized and realizing that they had to incorporate things on their own. Now, the gifts that the Queen of Sheba brought to Solomon, in some of the stories, they say that she came through water, and they'll picture her coming in on ships to the throne of Solomon. And others, they speak about how Solomon had this incredible glass floor in his throne room, and it looked like water. And so when Sheba came to the room, she thought she had to walk across water or a pool or something in order to get to Solomon. But in essence, what it was, is she put her toe on it and she realized that it was glass and that she could walk on it. But symbolically, what this shows is that the Queen of Sheba came through the etheric to the earth. Solomon represents the earth, and coming through water is the transformation and the transportation through the etheric. And this really is what the human soul does. And so it shows that the human soul coming through the etheric to the earth is seeking to internalize wisdom, and out of wisdom can one choose to love. Now, she gives Solomon many, many gifts. Now, this is a stained glass window from the Middle Ages, and I find it interesting that these windows portray her as purple, which is a sign of royalty. But apparently, I guess they didn't feel like they could do it all black, but it does show that she's dark. And she gives him the three gifts that would eventually be given to the Christ child. She gives him gold, she gives him frankincense, and she gives him myrrh. And this line that Solomon comes from is the line of Seth. It's the line of Seth. And Seth is the child of Adam and Eve that was born after the Cain and Abel incident. But Seth is able to comprehend spiritual truths. So we know, through the Matthew gospel that that the Christ child comes from the Solomon line. And so this is this really lovely transition. And again, how I see that is that she is representing this interesting union and also predicting the transformation of humanity, both through her union with Solomon, but the future birth of the Christ child. Now, Sheba is a historical figure. But as I said before, she's also represented as an aspect of humanity. Humanity at this point that was transitioning from this semi-old, and I would say semi-conscious realm where the spiritual truths were just kind of given. They were just a given. And, we read about this, particularly in the Old Testament, where people were always having these conversations with God and angels and all kinds of things. And they're very rare in our current era, but it was pretty consistent. But the transition between these states of being is all part of our education, building up of our bodies, our capabilities, our skills, so that we can become this 10th hierarchy. And what the Queen of Sheba is doing is showing this process of becoming inner directed. She goes to Solomon. She asks the questions. She is becoming inner directed. So not only is she becoming inner directed, but it took a lot of will and a lot of initiative in order for that to happen. And that is the very timely, but it also is a template for us in our modern age. We need to use our wills. We need to use our initiatives to develop our wisdom and our spiritual capacities. This transferring and transformation of the mysteries, as we know, if we're familiar with our Old Testament history, that Solomon was building the temple. And this temple was supposed to be really amazing. And Sheba, in a lot of the legends that were told after this time, was actually also involved with the building of the temple. Now, the temple was a physical structure, but it also was a spiritual structure. And this spiritual structure is the human soul and the human heart creating a vessel for divinity. Now, Sheba is a wonderful symbol of the earth. The earth is the place where humanity is preparing to join the cosmic community to transform a cosmos of wisdom into a cosmos of love. This is a beautiful icon. You can get this on allposters.com, but this also shows this meeting of Solomon and Sheba. But what's also interesting is that it goes and it shows the future Mary and the Christ child. So I'll leave you with this lovely slide of Solomon and Sheba from a close-up on the baptistry. And not only is this a meeting of cultures, a meeting of hearts, a meeting of minds, but it's also this beautiful symbolism of the transformation of the mysteries and what the human soul was doing at that time and preparing for now. Queen Makeda was searching for wisdom. She found wisdom, but she also found love, because out of wisdom, love is born. So I'll end our time today with this verse again from Luke. The Queen of the South shall rise up in judgment with the men of this generation. She came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, greater than Solomon is here. She was laying the groundwork for what we're doing now with grace, elegance, and love. If you would like to be a supporter, I have benefits ranging from $2 a month. So please go to Patreon and support the Black Madonna Speaks. If you would like, I can now say I've published 2 books, and one is the newest one. It's The Virgin of Guadalupe, Mysterious Messenger of Destiny. It's available now, just hot off the press. And also my very popular book, The Black Madonna. You can get 2. You can get them both. And they're both available through Barnes & Noble and Amazon. Blessings on your journey.